I think that, God, I think that when it comes to music education, it's really about what you want to learn and what you want to be doing with music. I think that certainly the best combination of sort of learning things on your own, being self-taught, discovering things by yourself, and then having a teacher, having someone, just give you a few hints, I think, there have been a few people in my life that have given me just a couple of hints, like, oh yeah, tune your guitar a little differently. Oh yeah, use this type of string, whatever. And it will be something that totally changes the course of what I do. So I think that there's nothing wrong with going to music school and becoming an excellent composer or guitar player or violinist or whatever it is you want to do. But I do think there is also there's value in pursuing music yourself. It's almost like, when you think you've discovered the craziest, best band in the world, and you're the only one that knows about it, and you get really excited. Well, that feeling can kind of also follow you when you have, you just stumble upon like a D major 7 chord, and you're like, wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I'm a genius. And then later on, you're like, oh. Just like everyone knows about that band, then everyone knows about this chord. But it's still, I don't know, it's like, somehow it like builds character musically, I'm not sure. Well, I just certainly wouldn't be here if I thought that teaching my songs would damage them. I do think for myself especially, there's kind of this air of mystery for a lot of guitar players around what I do, and I think being able to show people what I do and demystify some things people might go, oh wow, like that's interesting, or that's a cool move, or whatnot. But certainly, I've not done a lot of musical instruction before because it's almost been I have been a little precious, and I think I think the more music I play, the more I realize it should be shared, and this is just another way of. This is sort of, instead of playing live, instead of playing or something recorded, this is almost somewhere in between, or like a third, not really in between, it's kind of just like a third thing to do, and it's exciting. So that's really why I wanted to do it. It was, yeah, I just was thinking, wow, what's the best platform for people to be able to come and get some clue and some instruction without me actually having to go and give classes. People do often think that more guitarists or more musicians equals more or better music, and that is rarely the case. So while there are many, many people that I'd love to see live, that I'd love to hang out with later, talk shop about stuff, I don't know that there's someone that I want to play with, because that's going to make some really good music. And I think they always are trying to do it at festivals, or promoters are trying to put people together, and sometimes sometimes it really works. Like, I mean, God, most recent example, Robert Plant and Alison Krauss, great record, amazing, beautiful, but maybe a stroke of luck as well. It's not always possible to put together 4 people and go, okay, now you're a supergroup, and because everyone's used to doing what they do well, possibly on their own. So especially when you put 2 soloists together in a room and expect them to come up with magic, well, hey, good luck. I think making records for me is definitely a song-to-song process, because a lot of times I might put on a song that's I wrote maybe 4 years ago or 2 years ago, or next to a song that I wrote a week ago. I think one of the best instruments in the world is the studio, and I don't think people find that statement odd sometimes, but I think it's a really, what happens is when you go into a studio and you're using certain microphones, maybe certain sounds are the same, maybe certain drum sounds or guitar sounds or amps or whatever, and if you're not too all over the place, the records tend to come out sounding like, oh yeah, that sounds like that was on that record, because you made it in a studio at the same time. Now, if you're the kind of person that doesn't typically do that, sometimes that's interesting too. I mean, there's people that I know who are, you know, they've made one record in 2 years, and it's, you know, they'll record every 3 months or so, and that's a different technique as well. But I tend to view records, at least from the point of view of someone that still values an album. I think that for myself, they come together sounding the same because of the setting in which I do them. It has, making the last 5 albums has been a bit all over the place. The last 2 albums I've made with the same producer, Malcolm Byrne, and he lives in upstate New York, but the process between making the 2 albums was incredibly different. On my 4th album, Dreaming of Revenge, for instance, it was just really he and I, basically, and a lot of my friends coming up to visit and hang out and kind of videotape the process and whatnot. So it was sort of a social event, but it was also, from a musician's standpoint, it was like 2 people, you know, listening to songs and getting them together and figuring out, you know, well, what should we do with these and where do we go? And making this last record, we did it completely, almost in just utter solitude, but I did it with a band, which I've never made a record where the band comes and we all sit and play at the same time in the same room, and then the rest, all the other things are added later, like vocals and whatnot. So even though the producer and the studio were the same, I still think the process makes those 2 albums sound completely different from each other. And so that's something I definitely prefer to do. I don't like to do the same thing more than once. I tell people when they say, oh yeah, I want to learn guitar, I say, this is this unfortunate paradox where you know, they're like, oh, I want to get a guitar. What can you recommend that's for like $300? And I'm like, something really crappy, because typically, you know, the better guitars, the more sort of the better they sound and the more playable they are, the more likely you are to be able to learn on them. But that means you have to spend more money. And so a lot of times, I think people get very frustrated. I've picked up some guitars that belong to people, and they're like, oh yeah, I've just never really been able to learn to play, it's just so hard. And I'm like, I can barely play this thing. This isn't, you know, it's just, the action's terrible, something, you know. So I always try to tell people, you know, go to a guitar store if you're very serious about this, and, you know, just ask someone, just say, look, I want to be able to play, but I don't want this to be a hard process. I usually tell people to start on electric, just because electrics just typically are, you know, the necks aren't as thick and they're faster to play. And also just to get something with low action, and action is the distance between the strings and the fretboard, like what I'm pointing to here. But I think that those things are really crucial. You know, having the proper instrument to begin with can really make the difference. And it's sad sometimes when I see parents get their kids like some really crummy guitar, and, you know, and they're really well-meaning and everything, but they're like, oh yeah, well, I didn't want to make a huge investment because little Timmy, you know, who knows if he's going to really follow this. And so I think investing enough into your beginning is important, because otherwise you might wind up just too frustrated to continue. When people get too stuck into gear world, thinking that if their gear is really top, this does actually contradict what I just said, but I think that it's definitely not good to think that having better gear is going to make you a much better guitar player. I think it can, in the beginning, be easier to learn on. I think that's very incidental, though, because eventually, you know, it's like buying a better pair of running shoes is really not going to make you run all that much faster. Maybe by a couple of seconds, because that has nothing to, you know, but the shoes on your feet really don't have anything to do with what kind of runner you are. I mean, we're not talking like Olympic running, or we're just talking about jogging. So, you know, to think that better jogging shoes is going to make you a better jogger when you're not out there actually jogging, that's the problem. So I think yeah, it's good to have good gear and to know what you're doing. It's a lot of times, and I found this kind of this sort of male-female divide where girls tend to not know as much about what they're using and how things work, and maybe their amp situation. Maybe, you know, they're like, wow, I didn't know that if I put different speakers in my amp, it could sound 10 times better, or just sound different or something, you know, that's, and I'm always trying to, you know, tell chicks, like, it's fine, it's not gross to understand what you're doing and understand your instrument. I mean, I remember someone in a band that I won't mention the band's name, but they're actually pretty popular. And a friend of mine asked, "Oh, so what's that keyboard you're playing?" And she was like, "I don't know. It's purple." I mean, it's like she's playing the purple keyboard, so of course you know. So I think it's good to know. To not be afraid to know about your guitar, about your rig, about your pickups, about all that stuff.